Imagine this. It's the dead of winter in 1889, deep in the rugged Tobacco Root Mountains of Montana, where the wind howls like a pack of wolves and temperatures plunge to minus 35 degrees Fahrenheit. The kind of cold that snaps tree branches like brittle bones and turns your breath into ice crystals before it even leaves your mouth. And here's this lone prospector named Jack Thornton, a rugged guy in his late 30s, with a weathered face from years, chasing gold across the frontier. Whoosh just rolled into a rough mining camp called Fort Benton, way too late in the season to build a proper cabin. And while everyone else is hunkered down in their log shacks, burning through cords of wood just to keep from freezing solid in their sleep, Jack calmly announces he is going to dig a hole under a big spruce tree and live in it like some kind of burrowing animal. And the other miners, tough men themselves who've seen blizzards bury wagons, hole, and rivers freeze so thick you could drive a team across them. They laugh in his face, shaking their heads and muttering that he is signing his own death warrant, because no man can survive the Montana winter without 4 solid walls and a roaring fire. But what they don't know is that Jack's got a secret up his sleeve. Something he learned from the Blackfoot people during his travels. An ancient survival trick that's about to turn everything they think they know about beating the cold on its head. And as the first brutal storm rolls in, blanketing the mountains in feet of snow, the camp falls silent, waiting to see if Jack emerges alive or if they'll be digging his frozen body out come spring. And that's just the beginning of a story that proves sometimes the old ways, the ones whispered around campfires for centuries, are the ones that save your life when modern know-how fails spectacularly. Now, let's rewind a bit to understand how Jack ended up in this predicament, because back in the late 80s, the American West was exploding with dreamers and desperados flocking to places like Montana for the promise of gold, silver, and a fresh start. And Fort Benton was one of those makeshift settlements, a cluster of about 24 miners who'd staked claims in the Tobacco Roots, a range known for its steep canyons, dense forests of spruce and pine, and winters so harsh they could kill a man in hours if he wasn't prepared. With blizzards that dumped snow up to your waist overnight, and winds that stripped the heat from your body faster than you could chop wood. And these guys, men like Jim Morrison, a burly Irish immigrant with a quick temper and a knack for building. Pete Sanderson, a lanky veteran of the California gold rush who prided himself on his carpentry skills. And Charlie Webb, a quiet Texan who lost everything in a bad cattle drive and was hoping to strike it rich. They all followed the standard frontier playbook for winter survival, which meant spending weeks in the fall, felling trees, notching logs, and erecting cabins that were typically 12 by 14 feet with 7-foot walls, chinked with mud and grass to seal the cracks, topped with shake roofs made from split cedar, and featuring a central stone fireplace that was supposed to keep the inside toasty. But as anyone who's ever tried it knows, these cabins were far from perfect, with drafts sneaking through every gap, heat rising straight to the high ceilings and escaping, forcing the men to burn massive amounts of firewood. We're talking 18 to 24 cords per winter, which meant endless days chopping, hauling, and stacking just to stay alive. And even then, the insides rarely got above freezing on the worst nights, leading to miserable conditions where fingers went numb, food froze solid, and sleep was a battle against the creeping chill that seeped into your bones like poison. Jack Thornton, though, was different. He'd spent time trading with Native American tribes further north, picking up bits of wisdom from the Blackfoot and Lakota people who thrived in these brutal climates for generations without the luxury of sawmills or iron stoves. And one technique that stuck with him was the tree pit shelter, a deceptively simple setup that harnessed the Earth's natural warmth and the insulating power of snow. So when he arrived in November with the ground already hardening and the other miners smugly settled in their cabins, he scouted a massive spruce tree with a natural depression around its base, what we call a tree well, where snow accumulates less due to the branches overhead, and got to work digging an 8x6/foot pit about 4 feet deep, using the tree trunk itself as one wall to save effort, lining the floor with dry grass and pine boughs for insulation, framing the roof with saplings and branches, covering it all with bark, more boughs, and a thick layer of snow that would act like a blanket with an R value of around 15, meaning it trapped heat better than any log wall. And for entry, he crafted a low-crawl tunnel that kept out the wind while allowing him to vent smoke from a small interior fire pit, the whole thing taking just a few days instead of weeks, and costing him next to nothing in terms of materials or energy. But the miners watching from afar saw it as madness, with Morrison betting a week's rations that Jack wouldn't last a month, Sanderson calling it a fool's grave, and Webb quietly warning him that the cold doesn't forgive experiments. Yet Jack just smiled, stocked his shelter with dried meat, fur blankets, and a minimal supply of firewood. And as the sun set on that first snowy evening, he crawled inside, lit a small fire, and waited for the real test to begin. leaving the camp buzzing with speculation about whether this outsider escampa would pay off or end in tragedy. But what happened next would shock them all, making them question everything they thought they knew about surviving the Frontier's deadly grip. And that S, where the real magic of this story unfolds. So stick around to see how one man's hole in the ground outsmarted the mightiest winter storms. As the mercury plummeted that December, with 8 straight days of temperatures hovering between -20 and -35 degrees, the kind of bone-chilling cold that makes your eyelashes freeze together and turns exposed skin to leather in minutes. Jack Thornton's Tri-Pit shelter became a quiet fortress against the elements, maintaining an interior temperature of 50 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit thanks to the genius of its design, where the pit tapped into the Earth's constant 45-degree warmth below the frost line. The tree roots provided natural drainage to keep things dry. The snow roof acted as a super insulator that blocked wind and retained body heat. And the small fire burning just a few sticks at a time radiated efficiently in the compact space without wasting energy on high ceilings or drafty corners, allowing Jack to use only about 1.4 cords of wood for the entire season, a fraction of what the cabin dwellers consumed. And while he lounged comfortably on his fur bedding, reading by candlelight or cooking simple meals of venison stew and biscuit, the other miners were fighting a losing battle in their so-called superior structures. With Morrison waking up to find his cabin at a measly 12 degrees inside despite stoking the fire all night, the chinking cracking from the freeze-thaw cycles and letting in gusts that extinguished flames and scattered ashes. Sanderson cursing as he chopped wood in the dark, his hands blistered and his back aching from the relentless labor that left him exhausted and vulnerable. And Webb huddling under every blanket he owned, still shivering uncontrollably as the heat escaped through the roof like smoke signals of defeat, leading to real hardships where the men lost weight rapidly, Morrison dropping 26 pounds, Webb 21, and Sanderson 19, from the calorie burn of constant shivering and wood gathering, not to mention cases of frostbite that turned toes black and forced amputations in extreme instances. And one night, during a particularly vicious blizzard that buried the camp under 4 feet of fresh powder, Charlie Webb staggered to Jack's entrance, half-frozen and desperate, begging for shelter after his cabin's fire went out and he could relight it in the gale. And Jack, ever the gracious type, pulled him inside where the warmth hit like a summer breeze, reviving Webb with hot tea and stories of native ingenuity, explaining how the Blackfoot had used similar pits for winter hunting camps, designing them to mimic animal burrows that conserve energy and blend with the landscape. And as word spread through the camp, the mockery turned to curiosity, with miners peeking at the snow-mounded hump that was Jack's home, marveling at the thin wisp of smoke rising steadily while their own chimneys belched black clouds from overfueled fires. And by mid-January, after another spell of -40-degree nights that claimed a pack mule and nearly took Sanderson's life when he collapsed from exhaustion hauling logs, the tide began to turn, with Pete Sanderson being the first to crack, approaching Jack hat in hand to learn the secrets of the build, admitting that his cabin was a damn icebox compared to this underground haven. And Jack, without a hint of "I told you so," walked him through the process, stressing the importance of site selection, a south-facing slope for passive solar gain, a healthy tree for structural support, and proper ventilation to avoid carbon monoxide buildup drawing from Lakota, tailies of earth, lodges that withstood prairie winters for centuries. And soon enough, Sanderson started digging his own pit nearby, followed by Webb and even the stubborn Morrison, who grumbled but couldn't deny the evidence when he felt the warmth for himself, transforming the camp from a collection of leaky cabins to a network of efficient shelters that saved time, resources, and lives. And as spring thaw approached in March 1890, with rivers swelling and birds returning, the miners emerged healthier and stronger than ever, crediting Jack's method for getting them through what could have been a deadly season. But little did they know, this was just the spark of a larger revolution in frontier survival that would ripple out beyond Fort Benton, changing how people faced the wild for generations to come. And wait till you hear how it all played out in the years that followed. By the winter of 1890-91, word of Jack Thornton's Tri-Pit triumph had spread like wildfire through Montana's mining districts, with tailies carried by mule packers and stagecoach drivers to places like Butte, Helena, and even as far as the Bitterroot Valley, inspiring a wave of adopters who ditched their drafty cabins for these indigenous-inspired digs, resulting in at least 18 such shelters housing 34 miners across the tobacco routes alone, slashing fuel consumption by 75%, construction costs by 80%, and miraculously dropping winter death rates to zero in camps that previously lost men to exposure every season. And historical records from the era, including diaries preserved in the Montana Historical Society archives, confirmed the shift. with entries from prospectors noting how these pits not only kept them warm, but also camouflaged their presence from wildlife and potential claim jumpers, allowing for better hunting and security in the lawless frontier. And by 1895, the technique had influenced logging operations in the northern Rockies, where crews built semi-permanent tree pit bunkhouses that endured multiple seasons without rot or collapse. Trappers in the high country who used them as base camps for fur runs, and even homesteaders on the open plains who adapted the design into sod houses reinforced with tree elements for added stability, proving that Jack's innovation, rooted in Blackfoot and Lakota wisdom, was more than a fluke. And archaeology in the 1960s unearthed remnants of these shelters in the tobacco roots. While engineering studies in 1987 by the University of Montana tested replicas and found they indeed maintained a 35-degree warmer differential than standard cabins under similar conditions, attributing it to thermal mass principles, where the earth walls absorbed and slowly released heat, combined with snow's natural insulating properties that modern materials struggle to match. And Jack himself, in a 1923 interview with the Billings Gazette reporter just before his death at age 72, reflected on that fateful winter, crediting the native guides who'd shared their knowledge during his early trapping days along the Missouri River, emphasizing that the land teaches if you listen, and those old ways saved more lives than any axe ever did, a sentiment that resonates today as survival experts and outdoor enthusiasts revive tree pit techniques in wilderness training, from Boy Scout manuals to military cold weather ops, reminding us that in an age of high-tech gear, sometimes the simplest earthbound methods are the most reliable. And this story is just about one man's defiance against the cold, but a broader lesson in humility, cultural exchange, and adaptation that shaped the American West, showing how borrowing from those who'd lived there for millennia turned potential disaster into triumph. So next time you're out in the woods or facing your own tough spot, think of Jack Thornton and that humble hole under the spruce. It might just inspire you to dig a little deeper. If this tale of frontier grit and ancient smarts got you hooked, smash that like button. Subscribe for more forgotten history gems from the Wild West, and drop a comment below. What's the craziest survival story you've heard? Let's keep the conversation going, and I'll see you in the next video.